Thank you very much. And Olivia did my job very easily, so I will. She gave a lot of examples. So let me tackle this more from a principle point of view, because that was also referred to when we heard the distinction between different mammals. First, a little bit about Vodafone. We seems to be a bit of a capital splash here in the podium, so I might as well say we invest 81 billion euros in the last 5 years in Europe. We're Europe's largest mobile operator, actually, in terms of global footprint, we're the largest in the world. We are a significant user and actually partner with pretty much all companies that are around this table and pretty much all big platform players around the world. We also run some of the most important platforms in Europe, including we have the largest TV platform, and we also offer the largest worldwide platform on IoT, so Internet of Things. Now, I think just to take a step back, I will make 3 points. And I think these 3 points relate to some of the things that have been said here, so I hope to connect the dots a little bit. First, my point will be that transparency is not enough to address the situation we're in. And by the way, from a Vodafone perspective, we don't have a problem, even by running our own platform, to consider going beyond transparency. The simple reason is, as Olivia referred to, we're talking about dependency, bargaining power, and ultimately the question and the principal question around gatekeeping. Gatekeeping is an incredibly dangerous situation for any economy to be in, and we have it in a number of sectors. So it's nothing new from a point of view of an EU law. It, as Olivia referred to, control and distort interactions between market players. Now, from our point of view, transparency is a really good start. It's great to know and exactly how companies exercise their gatekeeping role. It does not, however, in any shape or form address the gatekeeping as such. You can't solve substantive problems by exposing the practices. You have to actually have substantive rules. And therefore, if you're serious about fairness, and fairness, I just want to underline, from our Vodafone perspective, fairness in the legal term is very important, but ultimately the way we run our business is on the principle of decency. We are a gatekeeper in certain senses, and by the way, we regulate it as a gatekeeper in certain senses. And that comes to my second point then. Fairness is not new in EU law. We have a number of member states that have already established legislation, and we have case law related to fairness. In the case of Vodafone, we fall under a regulation called net neutrality, which actually is built on a concept on the duty to deal. That duty to deal is to address the fact that as a carrier, we could have exercised the gatekeeping role. We could have prevented the customer's ability to get access to certain internet services, and also picked and cherry-picked between different actors that want to offer services on our carrier. That concept is very well established in Europe. Europe actually is fighting very hard to maintain net neutrality, and Vodafone is not questioning that principle. There are elements of it, and we can always discuss in different legislation whether we have struck the right balance, and we're not in favor of a heavy-handed regulation. But the principle of addressing gatekeeping from a fairness point of view, we certainly don't question. We question, however, if Europe has this practice of actually trying to tackle gatekeeping and has established legislation in member states and also with respect to certain sectors already on this principle, why wouldn't it draw its own conclusion with respect to this area? And that is really where we struggle with the Commission proposal. The Commission proposal, in our view, took a very cautious approach, a far too cautious approach, because we're not dealing with theoretical problems and we're not lacking experience on having to address this in other areas. So what do we want? And that's my third point. We do not agree with the Commission proposal. We don't think it goes far enough. And the simple reason is you can't address substantive problems with just talking or having more exposure of practices. We do think that basic decency to address the gatekeeping role will be to establish a rule against prohibition of unfair commercial practices. It is absolutely no reason whatsoever for anyone who has a gatekeeping role to not play by certain rules. And the certain rules, as a general principle, and we're talking about principles here, should be that you basically do not discriminate, you do not unfairly engage in practices and exploit the bargaining power through your gatekeeping position. And by the way, we have the same situation already as Vodafone, and in our own platforms, we apply that. So we don't really understand in what way unfair commercial practices should be part and parcel of the ecosystem of platforms that we are envisaging for Europe in the future. So therefore, a simple rule is to put it into the legislation. We support very much the fruitful discussions in the European Parliament. We think the European Parliament is the right place to exercise legislative foresight and understanding of the challenges that do exist, which are not theoretical. And of course, I agree entirely that it should be evidence-based. I had the pleasure of sitting down with DG Connect and actually walking through all the practices that Vodafone is a target of. Let me just say, my message to the Commission at that point, and this was before they tabled the proposal, was this. Vodafone has a massive bargaining power, and yet we struggle. Just imagine smaller players who cannot assert themselves in Palo Alto, sitting down with the corporates of those companies at the highest level and actually negotiate exactly the terms. We do that because we're Vodafone. But we're mindful that most European companies simply do not have that bargaining power. And from that point of view, basic decency in terms of substandard rules as we look for a fruitful and beneficial digital ecosystem for the future is key. Thank you.